All right, hello and good morning, everybody. I just actually finished a workout, hence why my hair is wet because I just got out of the shower. There was something that came up on the bike that I wanted to talk about last week, but I never did, and I don't know why I never did. So before I get into too many more details, let's roll the intro. I said in the video I was gonna talk about my thoughts on the must pass and my feelings on it, and I just never did. And honestly, that video was long enough, so I'm kind of glad I didn't. The only thing I would have done probably is split it into a different video in the end, but let's talk about it now. As you guys know, I passed this component. I passed it. I passed the 90% last year. I passed the 100% this year with some work needing to be done on my showing the work part, which I talked about last week. But that doesn't change my opinion on how unhealthy I think this part of this program and the steps to becoming a pharmacy technician is. We need to get into why this is the case. Like, why is this component there? So, if you go into the NAPRA competencies for pharmacy technicians, you'll see a component of the requirements that say calculations need to be done to zero tolerance for calculation error. Because when you're working with pharmacy and pharmacy products, if you make calculation errors, you can seriously harm a patient, and or worst case scenario, it can lead to death. There's no doubt about the stakes and the cost that is here. There needs to be something changed because the stress of this is not okay. Because pharmacy technicians can check calculations of pharmacists and other technicians, it's there as a safety feature. First of all, I want to show you guys how much work I put into passing my math class this year. I don't know if I might actually still have the books from last year. I hope I do, actually. Because I filled up an entire notebook of notes. Because last year I was doing basically everything on paper. This year I completely pretty much digitized everything. So I use the whiteboard function on the notes app that I use. And I'll show you that now. Here is the work that I did just for the remedial. This whiteboard was just for the remedial. And then I'll see if I can find some of the other stuff. All in all, I think I did each of our worksheets probably 3 times. I didn't use any AI because there was a lot of issues with the AI getting it wrong, which was kind of funny. So I didn't use any AI questions because I didn't want to have it be giving me the wrong answers and then not being able to figure out what was going on. So I tried to find either like nursing calculations for like flow rates and all of that, or like stuff from the US for their pharmacy technician exam for like practice questions that they have and all of that. So that's kind of what I did to practice, because I was getting to the point where I was starting to memorize what I was doing with the worksheets and they weren't working anymore. So if I leave it usually 2 or 3 weeks, it's like I've never done them, thankfully. So once I got to the remedial, I could actually go back and go through all of the old questions. I also went back through lecture notes and did the example questions. So there was so many hours of work. I think I did probably 2 or 3, maybe even 4 hours both days before the remedial exam. And likewise, probably before the must pass. I don't remember that first attempt very well because of how stressed I was that week. Between the finals for lab and that must pass, and then having to basically repeat my week again with having the remedials for lab and then the remedials for the must pass. It was a lot. Now getting into the stress of this, which is what I really want to talk about, because I don't know what it is about medical education, but sometimes there are things that, are argued to be kept in because, oh, well, we had to do it. We should force them to be having to do the same thing we did. When in reality, there's probably a better way to do things and test things, and they just don't want to do it because, well, I had to go through residency training where we did 24-hour shifts, despite the fact that, being awake for that long without adequate sleep, they're medical professionals. They know the dangers of that. And then when you're that sleep deprived, you should know how much of a risk you are to patients. So that's kind of the one I use because it's one I'm familiar with. So there's a lot of, issues with that. I don't know how many 24-hour shifts now are still done in medical education. I have no idea. I don't really know anyone in it. What would I personally propose to the Canadian boards? What I want to say is, if you want accuracy in calculations, pick out whatever math calculations you have on the MCQ exam. I don't know, maybe they do this already, but if you have calculations on the MCQ exam, you should have a zero tolerance for calculation errors on those questions that count towards whether you pass or not. That's how I would personally do it. And if there's a calculation question on the exam that doesn't count towards that, it should be labeled in the MCQ exam. Now, I don't know what these exams look like. I've never done them. But as far as I know, there's no requirement on the board exams for a certain accuracy on the calculations. That doesn't mean that doesn't exist. I'm just saying that as far as I know, it's not there. Like, it's in the actual accreditation for programs, and each of them are a little bit different in how they approach that zero tolerance for calculation mistakes. But I don't know. I feel like 100% is just a little insane on a particular test. And I mean, everything hinges and everything relies on how we do on either these one or two chances. Like, everything comes down to that. So you can imagine the amount of stress that we go through with these. Now, I want to say, oh, they make it doable, which they do. I did feel like I was a bit more prepared going into the remedial because I had a bit of an idea of what to expect, but there were still questions on there that challenged the problem solving. You're in that situation in that exam where anything less than 100% isn't good enough. So if you get to a question where you're like, I have no idea how to approach this, you're not only dealing with a time thing. So, like, in the real world, give me enough time and I could probably work my way through it. But not in that situation when you're on a limited time frame and, you're like, I have never seen this before in my life. Sorry if I'm getting a little heated during this video, but it's frustrating. And like I said, I feel like the stress put on us in this situation is not healthy. I would hope that as a parent, you would never tell your university student, if you don't get a 90 on your math exam, you're not good enough. Like, I have never gone into exams with the expectation of getting a certain grade. It's always been, just do the best you can. You've done your best to prepare for this as best as you can. Now, I'm not going to say in university that there wasn't calculations done to figure out what I needed to pass, because yeah, that was me. Because guess what? I wasn't a student where I was doing as well as I am doing now, where I did so well throughout the whole semester to the point where the final really didn't matter. And also in university too, there's a lot of situations where your finals are worth 50, 60% of your grade. I think the highest I had was a 70% of my final mark. Normally, if you have an exam only worth 10% of your final mark and it's a final, you would probably hardly even look at it. But because there's that, yeah, you need a 90 or 100% to pass this. And if you don't pass this, you don't pass the class. I just don't understand. There's gotta be a better way for this competency to be tested. Another suggestion I have is considering the consistency of the student as well. If you cannot do the math, you cannot pass your time competencies, you cannot pass your QAs, you cannot pass your practical exams. Like, there are other components where that math struggle would become very apparent. And I feel like there are better ways to test this particular competency than putting it all onto one exam or two exams. And the fact that I have to do this 2 more times in person when I'm also trying to manage all of the stress that comes with being in person, because it's basically all evaluations all of the time. That's what it looks like it's going to be, and it's what I expected it to be because that's what they're doing with that. I feel like it just adds so much pressure. The only thing I will say that I like about the next 2 is that there's no computers involved. I'm hoping it's going to be completely on paper and I don't need to worry about it. It should be hopefully completely on paper, not on lockdown browser, and not having to worry about, are you putting in the right numbers into a dang computer system? I mean, that's going to be an issue when you're writing your boards, that you're going to have a computer, but as far as I know, everything is multiple choice. So hopefully that'll help a bit. It's a little bit harder to select the wrong answer if you do the math correctly than it is to enter the wrong answer and forget, something simple like, or do something wrong because of formatting. So I have a feeling that, yeah, the computer is going to be a thing when in the boards, but it's not going to be the same because it's going to be like a multiple choice type situation. So that's my opinion on that. The only good feelings that I have about that is that the next 2 must passes are in person. It doesn't change the fact that you still have to go through that stress again. And it's the stress that I want to stress the most that is the unhealthiest about this. And it's because you're putting such high expectations on a situation that doesn't need to be that way. I'm not saying get rid of the competency because it's important for patient safety. I'm saying there's got to be a better way to do this that isn't this way. Talking about this has been pretty therapeutic, I gotta be honest with you guys. I wish I would have taken more footage actually during those 2 weeks. You guys know I meditate. I've gone through where stress affects me very differently now with this whole meditation awakening thing. There was no escaping the way I felt in my body throughout this whole thing. So it wasn't really up here in my mind. Like, my mind was catastrophizing about, oh my goodness, what happens if I don't pass? I cannot, like, there wasn't really an internal narrative with that, which was really weird, like completely opposite of what I'm used to. But it was all in my body. So like the heaviness in my chest, the feeling in my stomach. I felt like I barely ate for both weeks. I just was so stressed out. Despite the fact that there wasn't that narrative there, I knew that it was stress that was causing it. And as I said, I was so exhausted. I felt like I aged 3 years in 2 weeks. The people who know me will hear me have said that. So the lab stuff too is like, why is this happening at this point? Like, so I was very stressed out about that. But a lot of the stress was the must pass. And I knew it would be. That's one of the reasons why I tried to have sociology end early. Because the more you practice, the more you feel like you're in control of the situation. You're not, but more you feel like you're in control. And like the quicker I can recognize different types of problems, the less that timer is a factor. I also don't feel time the same way as I used to either. I'm constantly having to figure out where the timer is and go, okay, well, how am I doing with that? Okay, I've done this many questions. I'm probably okay. What I did the second time was I did the calculations twice without even thinking about it. So when I did the exam, I did the question, I did the calculations, and then I immediately did it again. And I caught some mistakes. So, and I actually went back and did another question during the remedial because I was rereading it going, I feel like I read that question wrong originally. So it was a dilution question. And it was like, someone adds this to this. So I'm like, wait a minute, they're adding it to the original. So that means I need to find out my final volume. I need to add these two things together. It's not saying that this is the final volume. So there was a few things that I caught. Very, very stressful exam, and do not wish this stress upon my worst enemy. Anyways, guys, I think that's where I want to end this video. I hope that this has kind of given you an idea or glimpse into what I felt about the must pass exams. I thought 90% was much better. I wish they, could tone that down a little bit. I know that it's a accreditation thing, so it would take a redoing of the accreditation before they were to be able to change it, but something's got to give there in some particular way in order to make it so that it's less stressful on the students. 90 is a little bit better than 100. I'm not going to say it's no stress at all, but if you can't do that first year math to a 90% accuracy, you're not going to be able to succeed in the lab. So all of it is important. And I'm hoping the same thing kind of gets shown to me or all of that when I'm actually doing the lab and doing different stuff with parental products in the in-person, like sterile compounding and all of that. I'm hoping it becomes a little bit more obvious with the math when it comes to that and kind of solidifies it like the labs have done for the first year math. Thanks for joining me, everyone. If you're interested in following the rest of my journey throughout school and as I go and do the registration process, be sure to subscribe, hit the like button so you don't miss any of those videos. I am not very consistent on posting on social media. I'm not very consistent on posting videos either. If there will be a video, I usually do it on Sundays, release the videos on Sundays. So that's it for this one, and thanks for joining me, everyone. Bye for now.